It's been a joke of mine that there's a dash of Yugoslavia in everything, which of course means Vegeta. For those who don't know, Vegeta is the ubiquitous spice blend used throughout former Yugoslavia that's primarily MSG.
You're listening to the Transformative Podcast brought to you by the Research Center for the History of Transformations at the University of Vienna.
Hello, you're listening to the Transformative Podcast of the Research Center for the History of Transformations. My name is Jelena Đureinović. Today, we are exploring the tradition of non-alignment through cooking. My guest is Kevin Kenjar, anthropologist based in Rijeka in Croatia. He is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Rijeka as a part of the ERC project REVENANT, Revivals of Empire, Nostalgia, Amnesia, Tribulation, where his research spans a number of sites, particularly in the post-Habsburg and post-Ottoman borderlands. Recently, he has also been paying homage to the non-aligned movement through exploration of various culinary combinations coming from its numerous member states, and this is what we are talking about today. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for joining me for this conversation today.
Hi, Jelena. It's nice to be here.
So tell me, what is the idea behind the non-aligned movement or non-aligned cooking? What inspired you to do this?
Well, it actually started as a kind of informal series of kind of themed dinner parties that really came about in, I guess it was 2021, when Drugo More here in Rijeka was hosting Moje Tvoje Naše, Mine, Yours, Ours, which had, I think it was number 16, which was a series of workshops and talks and artistic exhibitions about the non-aligned movement that was curated by Bojana Piškor. This brought in a lot of people to Rijeka who were working on non-alignment, who had a lot of interest in it, and this included a lot of dear friends and colleagues of mine. And it seemed like an ideal opportunity to have some people over for dinner. And so this was actually kind of the humble beginnings of it. And I've been cooking for quite a long time. It's one of my passions, I would say. And I've always had a very deep interest in cuisine as an aspect of human culture. I mean, it always kind of surprises me how it's somewhat neglected. There are, of course, I mean, a lot of research on cuisine, but eating is one of the most fundamental things that humans do, along with, breathing and sleeping. Is very cultural and very regionally specific. One of the things that always fascinated me about it was how different combinations and traditions can come together in new ways. My inspiration for this was actually doing a kind of fusion cuisine between the culinary traditions of different member states of the non-aligned movement. I think my first one was actually Suriname and Indonesia. And that combination isn't a coincidence. It's something that actually happens. It's very much a product of Dutch colonialism in this case. Both of these countries were Dutch colonies. And because of the patterns of migration, the Netherlands is home to both large Surinamese and Indonesian communities, and they often share the same spaces, the same grocery stores, occasionally restaurants, often a little food counter inside of a grocery store. You'll see a kind of organic fusion of these two traditions due to this shared legacy of Dutch colonialism. And I used to live in the Netherlands, and I would find this amazing food there, specifically at these small grocery stores and markets that were combining both Indonesian and Surinamese. And Surinamese itself is a very interesting fusion of Afro-Caribbean influences with a lot of Indian influence because of the patterns of labor migration that came from the subcontinent to South America. So I decided to create a thematic dinner party in honor of the non-aligned movement, and people were very impressed by this. The food was wonderful. It wasn't exactly my creation in this case. It was something that I had tried many times. It was certainly an inspiration for me to create some other combinations. And people would ask, well, what countries would you combine next for the next dinner party? I simply said, well, why don't you tell me? Why don't you pick? This started the tradition of the non-aligned movement, non spelled as Naan, like the Indian flatbread, where I actually have the participants choose. I think the next one after Suriname and Indonesia was, let's see, India and Vietnam, I think was the next one. Yeah, this was kind of the impetus for it. It was this opportunity to have these convivial gatherings of friends, scholars, activists coming together, talking about the legacy of colonialism, talking about migration over a delicious meal with a variety of spices, which I have to admit is something you don't see very much here in Croatia.
You did bring up some of the examples of the fusions you reinterpreted or made yourself. What else did you cook? Like, what does the non-aligned movement look like or can look like on the plate?
It's funny because obviously, like, I don't know the cuisine of every country and certainly how to cook the cuisines of every country, but I'm willing to learn. After the countries are selected, it kind of enters the next phase at that point of every non-aligned event, which is the research phase, which for me is a lot of fun. It involves me actually exploring the cuisines of these different countries and finding things that could work together. I've always been kind of creative when it comes to this and always willing to learn something new. And in this case, social media and YouTube is my friend. For each meal that I prepare, it often involves spending hours of watching, videos from Senegalese YouTube, for example, of learning these traditions and watching multiple people prepare the same dishes until I kind of find the leitmotif and see how it's made and see where I have a little space to play. In a way, a lot of this started in Belgrade, where I was living with another anthropologist at the time. We would often have dinner together, and he very much enjoyed my cooking. And we started this tradition of kind of gamifying our dinners together, where I would say, well, what are we having this evening? And he said, oh, I was thinking maybe you could make something from Papua New Guinea. So I'm like, yeah, I think I can do that. And of course, I immediately went to my laptop and sure enough, came up with, I think the dish is called cow, and it's a roasted sweet potato where after it's roasted, the sweet potato is hollowed out and then the potato is mixed with coconut milk and ginger and garlic and then put back into the little canoe of the empty potato and roasted a second time. And so I kind of got familiar with a variety of traditions and this willingness to be bold and find new combinations to end up on the plate.
As a historian of non-aligned Yugoslavia, of course, I have to ask you about bringing Yugoslavia into this context, which is, of course, not only about non-alignment, but also if you look at the countries of former Yugoslavia, this also introduces then different trans-imperial legacies, culinary legacies into the mix. Have you ever tried mixing some food coming from Yugoslavia with other non-aligned foods?
It's funny. It's been a joke of mine that there's a dash of Yugoslavia in everything, which of course means Vegeta. For those who don't know, Vegeta is the ubiquitous spice blend used throughout former Yugoslavia that's primarily MSG that seems to make everything taste good. I sometimes put a little dash of that in, but I don't have the same kind of bias against MSG that a lot of people have. That really came about from what I understand through a kind of racialized discourse against Chinese restaurants in the 1970s.
But no particular cevapi, sarma, and so on in combination with something from Asian and African non-aligned counterparts.
It's funny that you mentioned those examples specifically. Another aspect that I should definitely bring up is that every meal that I prepare for a non-aligned event is vegan.
Mhm.
I myself am not vegan. I am vegetarian, but I find vegan cooking to be the most inclusive because people coming from a variety of places often have different dietary restrictions. So by making the food vegan, it assures it's also kosher, it's also halal. It's the most inclusive form of cooking. And in this way, I'm able to kind of accommodate the most possible people. As far as traditional foods from throughout Yugoslavia, obviously Yugoslav cuisine itself has a variety of influences that are very regionally specific. Here in Rijeka, of course, there's a strong Italian influence and more specifically Venetian. So you'll see Venetian dishes like rizi rice and peas, and risotto and things like this, while in the parts that were formerly part of the Ottoman Empire, you see a lot of like burek and roasted meat and sarma and things like this. While in Zagreb, a lot of that is absent or was kind of a later addition. I still remember the shock when I was speaking with people in Zagreb, where I used to live, and someone asked me, do you know how to make that one Albanian dessert, the really sweet one? I said, which one are you talking about? They said, oh, what's the name of it? It's really sweet. Baklava. And if my friends in Bosnia and Serbia had heard them say that that's an Albanian dish, it, of course, would have sparked controversy. But it isn't local to Zagreb. It came later, largely through Albanian migrants from other parts of Yugoslavia coming to Zagreb and opening up slastičanice, these sweet shops where they introduced baklava to Zagreb. No one has actually ever selected Yugoslavia as one of the countries to combine. Of course, there's a chance it will come up in the future, and I'd be happy to try that. There's a good friend and cooking comrade of mine in Belgrade who has been exploring this in particular of doing various varieties of burek, but with Indian fillings, doing the typical potato burek from Pirusha, but using like the filling you would use for samosas and things like this, or switching the spinach from zeljanica with palak paneer, for example. Like there's plenty of room to play in this regard.
Yeah, definitely. And it really does sound very interesting and probably also very tasty. But in the meantime, this is not only something that you do in Rijeka or at home or with people who visited and so on, but you have been also traveling with this, how to say, initiative or project. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
So, to my surprise, what started out as, this series of informal dinner parties kind of called on exclusively by word of mouth, no pun intended. But people were very interested in trying some of this, and the people who did try it wanted more. I started to be invited to do meals for other people, and really the first public event that I did was at the Island School of Social Autonomy on the island of Vis. And I had been invited there by Srećko Horvat to make a meal. In this case, I let the participants at the Island School of Social Autonomy choose the countries, and it ended up being Senegal and India. It was a bit intimidating to make food for, I think it was around 100 people, but I managed. I made a Senegalese Indian chickpea curry. So this kind of chana masala from India, but fused with a Senegalese peanut stew called mafe. So it ended up being this very velvety peanut chickpea stew. It certainly made an impression, and a lot of the participants were wondering how they could find more and when I would publish the recipe and things like this. I should note the recipe was just published in a Dutch arts journal called Kunstlicht. It just came out last month, I believe, a special edition on the aesthetics of non-alignment. So a summary of this event and the kind of basics of what I'm doing was published alongside the recipe in this journal. Yeah, several of the guests who were there at ISA were very interested in having me come and hold events in various countries where they are. Shortly after, I was invited to Berlin by this art collective there, Stodiolat, originally from St. Petersburg and now in exile in Berlin, and was able to host an event there. That was a very lovely evening that included a fantastic conversation about the impact of imperialism and the legacy of colonialism, and of course, a lot of delicious food.
And for the end, I would like to also ask you, how does non-aligned cooking feed into your profile as a scholar? Are you a food anthropologist now? Is this also the path that your research will take in the future?
Well, in terms of scholarship, I've gone in a lot of different directions. This is just kind of how my mind works. So one day I'll be presenting about the Habsburg Arctic, and the next day I'll be talking about the Balkans as the birthplace of Proto-Zionism and Ottoman Palestine. So really, I'm able to work on a lot of different things. And one of them that has always been very important to me is migration. This is something I have been working on for a while, not only migration, but also questions of urban diversity, of ethno-religious diversity in European cities. And a big part of this, I think, is cuisine. And so this is something that I'm really hoping to pursue further. I have the outlines of a project at this point that I hope to develop that I've tentatively named SPICE, Sociocultural Perspectives on Immigration and Cuisine in Europe. And I'd really like to pursue this topic and see how migrants coming together in cities forge new communities and new solidarities, often through shared infrastructures that includes grocery stores and restaurants. And so, yes, this is something I'd definitely like to pursue in an academic sense as well.
Thank you, Kevin. That brings us to the end of our today's conversation about certainly a novel perspective on the non-aligned movement. This was RECET Transformative Podcast with me, Jelena Đureinović, and my guest, Kevin Kenjar.
Thank you very much. It was great being here.